Tonight on Ukraine Today, explosions in Russia's Krasnodar region. Ukrainian drones struck the Ilsky oil refinery. A massive fire broke out at the site. The biggest battlefield gains in years. What does the American Institute for the Study of War link to Ukraine's successful counterattacks? American and Danish pilots in Ukraine's skies? Is it true that Ukraine has formed an F-16 squadron that includes Western veterans? Peace talks. What should we expect from the new round of trilateral meetings in Geneva? All this and more right now. Hello, I'm Volodymyr Robchun and this is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe, like this video, and let's get to the news. Let's begin with a visit from Ukrainian drones to Russia's Krasnodar region. The Ilsky oil refinery was attacked. A fuel storage tank was damaged and a large-scale fire broke out at the site. Permission has been granted to publish information about the destruction of several valuable pieces of Russian military equipment in temporarily occupied Crimea. Fighters of the Defense Intelligence Special Unit Primary Ghosts hit an air defense missile and gun system, a radar system, and a landing craft. Last week, Ukraine achieved its biggest battlefield successes in the past 2.5 years. This was reported by Agence France Presse. After analyzing data from the American Institute for the Study of War, the agency concluded that from Wednesday to Sunday, Ukrainian forces liberated 201 square kilometers of territory. That is equivalent to what Russian troops captured during the entire month of December. Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War believe these successful Ukrainian counterattacks are likely linked to the blocking of Starlink satellite communications for Russian forces. Ukrainian units are conducting effective counteroffensive and assault operations in the Alexandrovsky direction and near Gulay-Pole. This was reported by Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, General Alexander Syrskyi. More on the battlefield situation in the report.
Another blackout in Belgorod. Drones struck the Belgorod CHP and the Frunzensky electrical substation. The governor reports serious damage to Belgorod's energy infrastructure.
We can say that the Russian air defense system turned out to be completely unprepared to repel external attacks from the Ukrainian defense forces.
The head of the Bryansk region reported that as a result of a prolonged drone attack on energy infrastructure facilities, 5 municipalities in the region, as well as part of the regional capital itself, were left without electricity and heating.
At the moment, there have been widespread outages of electricity, heating and water in Belgorod and several settlements in the Belgorod region. In addition, a similar situation is occurring in 5 municipal districts within the Bryansk region.
UK Defense Secretary John Gilly stated that the Russian army is suffering losses that exceed its ability to replenish its personnel. On some sections of the front, the loss ratio is 25-1.
According to the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the width of the so-called kill zones is currently about 15 to 20 kilometers. Let me remind you, in 2005, the width of the kill zones was at most up to 10 kilometers.
Earlier, Ukraine's Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov announced plans to increase Russia's monthly losses to 50,000 by summer, and it seems that the occupiers themselves are starting to switch to the Ukrainian side just to save themselves. These are the footage of the soldiers from the 225th Separate Assault Regiment. During the clearing of one of the settlements, Ukrainian defenders captured an occupier. The Russian soldier untied his hands and voluntarily ran toward the Ukrainians to save his life.
At the moment, Ukraine's defense forces are conducting successful counter-offensive operations in the Zaporizhzhia direction, and a number of settlements at the junction of the Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk regions have been deoccupied. The Russian occupiers indirectly confirm the successful actions of Ukraine's defense forces.
Journalists showed Ukrainian FP-1 drones, which are produced by the company Firepoint.
These drones significantly enhance the capabilities of Ukraine's defense forces. We're talking about both stationary targets, such as defense industry enterprises, and, accordingly, oil refining facilities.
In Russia, not only strategic sites are catching fire, but also propagandists.
And quite proudly, with immense joy, they show exactly how these advanced German drones, manufactured in large German factories, will be used to kill the Russians.
Behind this outburst of anger lies the fear that Ukraine will produce drones in cooperation with Germany. We can add that Mr. Solovyov will now need a lot of nerves. After all, this is far from Ukraine's only project.
Over the past 24 hours, Russia lost at least 890 troops killed and wounded since the beginning of the full-scale invasion that brings the total to 1,255,340 occupiers. In addition, during the last day, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 2 Russian tanks, 3 armored combat vehicles, 4 artillery systems and dozens of other pieces of enemy military equipment. Monitoring channels show the approximate routes of missiles and drones launched by Russian forces overnight. In total, 400 drones and 29 missiles of various types. Explosions were heard in Dnipro and Odessa, as well as in the Kirovograd, Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk and Donetsk regions. Russian forces killed 3 workers of the Slovyansk thermal power plant with a drone strike. In Odessa and Burштyn, there are problems with electricity, heating and water supply. Ukraine has reportedly formed an F-16 squadron that includes, alongside Ukrainian pilots, veteran pilots from the United States and the Netherlands. This was reported by the French outlet Intelligence Online. According to the publication, they are helping defend the Ukrainian skies from Russian missiles and drones. The article says that the Western veterans signed temporary contracts. They do not hold official ranks within Ukraine's military structure and are not listed in official personnel rosters. It's important to note that the Ukrainian Air Force has denied this information. Meanwhile, Germany has exhausted its stockpile of missiles for air defense systems. This was stated by German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul in an interview with Deutschlandfunk. According to him, everything that leaves the production line is immediately transferred to Ukraine. The mechanism is financed mainly by European partners. It seems that Europe is learning to live without US assistance. Strong statements by European officials during the Munich Security Conference point exactly to this. All the details next.
Independent Europe. The EU is preparing a plan B due to the unreliability of the US.
In fact, these changes actually began with the previous Munich conference.
For the first time since the Cold War, the European Union is seriously discussing the creation of its own nuclear deterrent capability. In European capitals, there was anxiety as they awaited the speech of US Secretary of State Marco Rubio at the Munich Security Conference. The reason was last year's speech by the US Vice President, which was filled with aggression toward Europe. But Rubio, on the contrary, emphasized the close ties between the US and Europe.
We are genuinely concerned about your future and ours. And if we sometimes disagree, it's because we care deeply about Europe, with which we are connected not only economically or militarily. We are connected spiritually and culturally. We want Europe to be strong. We believe that Europe must survive.
The security of the EU largely depends on the so-called US nuclear umbrella and guarantees within NATO. However, rising tensions in relations and the potential for a change in political course in Washington are prompting the development of alternative scenarios for protection against the Russian threat.
Essentially, Europe is left face to face with the Russian threat. The United States does not give a clear answer as to whether they will help in any way or not. Therefore, all of this must be taken into account, and in one way or another, it affects European policy. In addition, there is the situation with Ukraine, which at one time gave up its nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees supposedly provided by the United States, guarantees that, as it turned out after the fact, were not really guarantees at all. All of this has shown that nuclear weapons are probably the only real guarantee of security in the modern world. At
present, among European countries, only the United Kingdom and France possess nuclear weapons. Together, they have about 400 warheads. The United Kingdom depends on supplies from the US for its arsenal, whereas France is able to produce its own warheads. It is expected that this month, French President Emmanuel Macron will propose nuclear deterrence to other European countries, according to Bloomberg. It should be noted that Polish President Nawrocki has advocated for the country's participation in the nuclear project, but in accordance with international norms.
I'm a strong supporter of Poland joining the nuclear project. What I mean is this. The path to creating Poland's nuclear capability in full compliance with all international norms is the direction we should follow.
The German Defense Minister Pistorius also stated at the Munich conference that Europe must ensure its own security.
Europe must take greater responsibility for its own security, while the United States will continue to provide strategic and nuclear support for the foreseeable future.
Under Pistorius' leadership, Germany is actively modernizing the Bundeswehr and changing its defense policy in light of the new geopolitical reality. The Minister of Defense has repeatedly emphasized the need to restructure the foundations of European security, demanding that Europe ensure its own defense capability independently.
All of this is absolutely logical and obvious. Furthermore, it seems increasingly evident and clear that the total number of prominent leading states will likely increase within the very near and foreseeable future. Overall, Chancellor Friedrich Merz has officially announced a highly ambitious and comprehensive goal for the future of the European continent: that Germany should have the most powerful army in Europe. In principle, I don't see anything unrealistic here, considering Germany's military, technical, and economic potential. Germany, in fact, can provide itself with the necessary armaments on its own. So overall, I think the goal is ambitious but realistic.
On the sidelines of the Munich conference, the Chinese foreign minister also spoke. Wang Yi stated that China is not a directly involved party in the war between Russia and Ukraine and therefore does not have the final say. At the same time, Western officials have described Beijing as a key mediator in this war.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. Now's the perfect time to subscribe to the channel, like this video and share it. Please do it. Thank you, and glory to Ukraine. Thousands of North Korean soldiers have concentrated near Ukraine's borders. What is the Kremlin trying to achieve, and what role is assigned to this help from Kim Jong-un? Details in the report.
In his attempts to please the Russian dictator, Kim Jong-un lost his best soldiers.
I saw my comrades die right next to me. I hid in a dugout.
In October 2024, North Korean troops joined the main killers of the 21st century. At first it was about sending engineering brigades, but the Russian army suffered such heavy losses in the Kursk region that it became impossible to quickly make up for them with their own forces. The Ukrainian forces' August raid directly into Russian territory forced the command to change their plans. Instead of engineers, what was needed were capable infantry units.
Russian troops are critically short of personnel to cover all sections of the front. And as soon as a critical situation arises somewhere, it immediately leads, if not to a failure, then at least to a weakening of defensive capabilities.
The operation is developing successfully, strictly in accordance with pre-approved plans.
During this time, more than 18,000 soldiers have taken part in the war against Ukraine. According to South Korean intelligence, about 6,000 have been killed and only 1,100 have returned home. Another approximately 11,000 servicemen are holed up on Russian territory in the Kursk region, adjacent to the Sumy region.
North Korean soldiers are learning modern combat tactics that have emerged and are used in contemporary warfare. This includes unmanned systems and communication systems. Others include unmanned systems, including those with artificial intelligence, and accordingly combat tactics. These are combat operations that differ somewhat from previous wars. These are small assault groups.
At first glance, it may seem that the North Koreans are simply lying in ambush. But their presence in the Kursk region has strategic significance.
If tomorrow the KPA units are withdrawn from the Kursk region, the entire group will be severely weakened. And it will not only be unable to conduct offensive operations in the Sumy region, but also to hold even the captured territories in defense.
This is a kind of buffer that allows Russian troops to hold the front line and carry out limited offensive operations.
The actions carried out by North Korean soldiers behind the front line have allowed Putin to free up, well, roughly the same number, about 10,000 Russian soldiers, and transfer them from the rear, well, the relatively close rear, from the second or third line, so to speak, to the front line to take part in combat operations. Thus, as it were, to numerically reinforce their troops directly on the front line.
North Korean troops follow the agreement between the two nations, staying within the Russian Federation.
Most likely, at least for the time being, they will probably not cross the border into Ukraine, but will instead continue to assist the Russian army directly on Russian territory.
The official reasons are supposedly compliance with international restrictions and North Korea's reluctance to escalate the situation with sanctions. Unofficially, the cost and conditions set by Kim Jong-un make the use of North Koreans in Ukraine economically and politically unfeasible for the Kremlin.
If North Korean troops cross into our country, then Kim Jong-un himself becomes a legitimate target according to international legal documents. And
Don't even try to look for any good intentions. It's all banal and simple. For Kim Jong-un, sending thousands of soldiers to certain death is just a way to score points and make money. And for Moscow, the North Koreans are just a temporary quick fix masking the systemic problems of the army.
the North Koreans have started more or less active construction. They built several blocks, somewhere in some of the more depressed areas.
For example, in the new Hwasan district, the Sefioli Street was opened. The North Korean dictator cynically declared that it was supposedly in honor of soldiers killed by the Ukrainian defense forces. According to him, the facility should become a source of honor for the generation of Yegor Sepkinyan and the state. Thus, the presence of North Koreans on Kursk soil is a symbol that Russia cannot fight on its own. And for Ukraine, it is yet another proof that the enemy is weak.
The United States is not forcing anyone to agree to a peace deal to end the war in Ukraine. This was stated by the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He emphasized that only Washington managed to bring Kiev and Moscow to the same negotiation table. Speaking of negotiations, today and tomorrow a new round of trilateral meetings between representatives of Ukraine, the United States and Russia will take place in Geneva. Next, the behind-the-scenes details of the peace process.
Ceasefire, security guarantees, and post-war reconstruction. But what does Ukraine want from the United States in the negotiation process?
The first of these steps, according to Zelensky, is reliable security guarantees, which Trump must provide without any dialogue with Putin, because these should be security guarantees from the United States. The second step, according to Zelensky, is the need to allocate funds for the reconstruction of Ukraine after the end of the Russian-Ukrainian war. And the third step is a ceasefire on the Russian-Ukrainian front. In Zelensky's view, Trump should put pressure on Putin so that he agrees to a ceasefire and stops the fighting.
So far, one of the key issues that has seen no progress remains the question of territories.
At a minimum, what they want is Donbas, Donetsk region, but in its entirety, in order to sell it as a victory to their society. Perhaps not even to society, because sometimes we think it's about society, but maybe it's for himself. It's a victory for himself. I'm not sure he even thinks about how to sell something to society, because he can do that at any moment. He's been doing it for the past 30 years. That's exactly why we can't just withdraw troops from our territory or trade territory, one piece for another. It's something completely insane. That's why it's not just about territories.
In fact, the issue of territories will become a key point at the negotiations in Geneva. In addition, during his meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Zelensky also mentioned that the talks in Geneva will address Russian attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure, which, by the way, Ukraine does not leave unanswered.
We don't have many Flamingo missiles. We used them a few days ago on the territory where the Oreshnik system is located, and we'll see the results. But I think we've already seen the results. It's very important that we work on increasing the number of these missiles.
The fact that the issue of territories will be one of the key topics in Geneva is also confirmed by the Kremlin. They are also announcing changes to the composition of their delegation.
The next round of negotiations on the Ukrainian settlement will also take place in the trilateral Russian-American-Ukrainian format on February 17th through 18th in Geneva. This time, the Russian delegation will be headed by the Russian presidential aide, Medinsky.
In fact, the reason given for Putin's aide, Vladimir Medinsky, known in particular for creating Russian pseudo-history and spreading propagandist narratives, heading the Russian delegation this time, is that the issue of territories will be discussed in Geneva.
Again, if we talk about the personnel changes that have taken place ahead of the next round of negotiations in Geneva, right? This is no longer Abu Dhabi. There, instead of the head of the main intelligence directorate, who, by the way, as far as I understand, remained part of the Russian delegation, Mr. Medinsky appeared, someone we know well from the negotiation process in Istanbul, which was, from a political standpoint, a completely dead-end and hopeless negotiation process, where, apart from the humanitarian track on prisoner exchanges, essentially nothing was achieved.
There will also be a hardliner on Ukraine in the Russian negotiating team, Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Galuzin.
And there's another very interesting person who has joined this negotiating group, Mr. Galuzin, the Deputy Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation, who even before this round of talks in Geneva made a rather amusing statement that Russia wants to talk to Europe and America about what? About introducing what in Ukraine? That's right, external governance. In other words, exactly what Putin has been talking about for a very, very long time.
And such changes in the Russian negotiating group are yet another sign that the Kremlin is merely simulating negotiations.
By the way, it's not just us saying that the Russian Federation is not approaching the negotiation process constructively and continues to imitate it. Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, also spoke about this at the Munich Security Conference. He stated this directly. Moreover, in her latest statement, this was emphasized by Kaja Kallas, the chief diplomat of the European Union, who also holds the combined position of EU Commissioner for Security Affairs. She also emphatically pointed out that Russia is merely putting on a show of the negotiation process and is in fact demonstrating a complete lack of genuine interest in achieving peace, which is clearly illustrated by their official statements and the specific rhetoric they use in the public sphere.
Should we expect significant progress from the meeting in Geneva? That's a rhetorical question. Because despite the fact that the negotiation process no longer looks the way it did a few years ago, the Kremlin remains firm on key issues and seeks full control over Ukraine.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Like, subscribe, comment, share. And see you next time.